Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Pro Democracy Pod. We have a really exciting episode today. We're going to have Max Blumenthal talking about Afghanistan with us. So we're really excited for that. I think that a lot has been said in the past days about Afghanistan, which is like kind of ironic to me because, this is a 20-year war. And there was not a lot of reporting over the years on this conflict. It's been pretty much like 90% of the reporting has been in the past week or so. And I actually, I want to start off by sharing some clips with you guys that kind of showcase the state of journalism on this conflict that are like, they're pretty recent videos that I think are really relevant. So I'm going to set that up right now. I just, excuse me, because I'm still getting used to this. I hope this looks all right on your end. Do we see it? Yeah, great. Okay, so first, I want to share this clip from Julian Assange, who, of course, published the Afghan war logs that showed, the way that U.S. Reaper drones were working and the U.S. killing and NATO killing of innocent civilians. So I just want to share this clip where this is from 2011, and he has a message that I think has been echoed by some in the past few days, but hasn't gotten a whole lot of exposure in the mainstream media. So just take a look at this. Now, just hold on a second. I'm trying to stop this video. My computer's very slow. And okay, so here's the second video I want to show you guys. And obviously, you know that Julian Assange is in a maximum security prison in London. Here is the England-based Guardian newspaper. I guess they've recently started working on TikTok, and this is what they're doing on TikTok. So I hope you guys were able to hear those clips. I just personally, I love the image of that like nerdy British Guardian reporter, in front of like sideways in front of the World Trade Center and Osama bin Laden. And obviously the Guardian's a hugely successful news outlet. So I think those two clips just really illustrate the state of journalism on this conflict. I mean, even today, because those are like clips that, were the Assange clip is from 2011, but this Guardian clip is very recent, and the Assange clip was shared in 2011, and it's so relevant today. So I really wanted to share that.
I have to interrupt you because I think some people probably thought this as well, but I couldn't hear any of the sound.
Oh, is that right? I did put on audio sharing. Okay, so Julian Assange basically what his point was that Afghanistan was not meant to be a successful war. It was meant to be an endless war, and while it wasn't exactly endless, it did last for 20 years. So in that right, it was successful. And what it was meant to do was take money from the U.S. taxpayers and funnel it into U.S. elites, defense contractors, the military-industrial complex, and get them rich at the expense of U.S. taxpayers. And also, not mentioned by Assange, but I'm sure he obviously knows this, is, access to, Afghanistan's natural resources, the rare earth metals and the oil, which actually bridges kind of to something else that I wanted to talk about, which was the U.S.-backed oil pipeline by the Unocal company. I'm not sure if I'm saying that exactly right, but this was a pipeline that they were planning on building through Afghanistan in the 1990s, and the Taliban, was actually flown to meet with this project had the backing of Bill Clinton, and the Taliban was supposed to be the guards of this pipeline. They were supposed to administer it, and they were flown to DC by a guy by the name of Zalmay Khalilzad. This guy, he actually got his start, working on Operation Cyclone, which was a project of Brzezinski. It was, basically they funded billions of dollars to the precursor of the Taliban called the Afghan Mujahideen, and this group obviously splintered off into groups like Al Qaeda and the Taliban. And they gave them tons of guns to basically destroy the Soviet government. So Khalilzad got his start there, and this is a guy that I actually wrote about for Mint Press News a few years ago, who has been super relevant. I mean, like, he helped write the Afghanistan Constitution. He actually once tried to have himself installed as an unelected ruler of Afghanistan. This is all in my report, and it's all backed up by official evidence and mainstream reporting, like from the New York Times and whatnot. And so this is the guy that Donald Trump picked to lead the U.S. team in negotiations with the Taliban in Doha, Qatar. And then, again, he was retained by Joe Biden to lead those negotiations. They kept him on board with the presidential transition. And so, this is like one of the worst characters in D.C., a perfect example of why our policy failed so hard. And I could have told you that this was going to be a disaster. And part of the reason is because you have guys like Zalmay Khalilzad leading the charge. So, every week we've been talking about how we're going to give our democracy award for the, most exemplary leader of democracy movements. And this week we've decided to give it to Zalmay Khalilzad.
Congrats.
Congrats, Zalmay. So, I mean, Mila, you had like a really interesting tweet the other day, which I think was kind of in line with what Julian Assange was saying.
Great minds think alike. No.
Well, tell us what your point was there.
Yeah, okay, because I've been seeing a lot of, like, sometimes the rhetoric is actually like well-meaning, where it's saying stuff like, these failed wars that we get into ourselves, these wars failed. Like, the narrative is kind of like, or like, oh, America couldn't even beat this like mountain army and whatever. And I think, my point was that when we accept these narratives, what we're doing is we're actually taking the pro-war politicians at their word, because we're acting like the object of the whole thing is to like actually change the government into a better government. Like, the premise of regime change, the stated goals of regime change are obviously very different from like who is actually profiting from it. And so, you see these wars are like massive wealth transfers to arms dealers and to these corrupt politicians, to oil companies and whatever. These guys totally fine. And in the case of Afghanistan, there's also like the opioid issue as well. And so, like, the people who are meant to profit already profited. And I don't really see the architects of this war being prosecuted for what they've done, despite the fact that, if this was another country, there might be a different international response to it. So, I mean, I think they got off pretty scot-free. The people who are the harmed ones are, obviously, the people who, like, the Americans who are not part of the ruling class, who, have basic necessities denied to them, while there's this wealth transfer that's essentially going to these arms companies. So, I mean, it failed the people, but it was never meant to benefit the people to begin with. it was never actually meant to keep them safe, and it was never, meant to benefit the people of Afghanistan either. And so, like, my point is, don't take these people at their words. They're politicians, like, they especially, of all people, should not be taken at their word.
Yeah. And I want to interrupt real quick because we have been broadcasting so far on Periscope. We're going to drop that link and encourage everyone to move over to the Rockfin stream to catch the rest of the episode. Once again, we're going to have Max Blumenthal on to talk about all of this stuff in Afghanistan. So thank you for joining us, and join us on Rockfin, please.
Yeah, it's gonna be good. Max's book has some interesting stuff on Afghanistan as well that I think will be good to talk about.
I'm sorry, just a second here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry for the technical difficulties, especially with those clips. I'm told on Twitter that there's no audio on those clips, so I'll drop them in the comments at the end because I really do think they're important. But once again I want to thank everyone for joining us. I told my family that I was starting a podcast, and they were asking me if I had a co-host, and I said, yeah, she's from Canada, and they didn't believe me. So we're still getting confirmation on Mila's actual existence.
Yeah, I'm actually like in New York right now. No, yeah, it's true. The rumors are true.
She's alive and well, and not a Taliban hostage either.
No, nor am I like pulling a Hariri,
Oh right, yeah. Are you staying at the Ritz-Carlton?
Yeah, I'm actually at the Ritz-Carlton right now. Please send help.
It looks like it from your background.
This is a really old building in the Outremont in Montreal. It's like a classic, like Jewish Orthodox neighborhood, and the deli and the bagels here are divine. So
I'm very jealous. As I was telling Mila before the podcast, I cannot find a good bagel in Mexico, and my Jewish soul is aching. So, yeah. But another thing that I really wanted to talk about, and this is in line with the theme of our podcast and Afghanistan, is these protests that have been going on in front of the White House the past few days. I've only seen like 2 clips or so from different days on these podcasts, but you have pro-democracy protesters, people that have supported the alleged democracy in Afghanistan, which was obviously not stable enough to last for more than 72 hours without U.S. support. But you have these people outside the White House that have been urging for U.S. intervention, NATO intervention to stop the Taliban. And it's like, what have we been doing for the past 20 years? But, of course, these people are democracy supporters, and so the media loves them. But, I think, this kind of really demonstrates the once again, the theme of our podcast, which is how these democracy-led movements or democracy movements, or people-led movements, as they call them, are really just out to provoke U.S. dominance, U.S. economic and political dominance over their countries. And there's a great journalist by the name of Yasha Levine who has this concept that he talks about a lot called the weaponized immigrant, which I think is absolutely relevant here. I mean, these people are, basically advocating for the U.S. to once again violate the sovereignty of Afghanistan. This is kind of common with diaspora communities. I mean, I'm sure Mila can talk about that a little bit more. Being
like the weaponized. Yeah, I think I see it. I mean, I think Yasha's terminology is really good. Like it's very intuitive, and somehow I think he was the first person I've heard that term from. But I do definitely think like it's a thing in diaspora communities for sure. Lebanese people have like really entertaining ones though. There's like Bridget Gabriel, whose real name's actually like Hanan.
Oh God. I'm
Um,
sorry, but like Hanan is just such a nicer name than Bridget.
and
Like
Bridget.
not to be like rude to Irish people, but um I'm not doing anti-Irish racism here. I just
This
think
is now like a battle
phonetically it's
between
nicer.
Lebanese and Irish. But you know who we do have is Nassim Taleb, who is, I think, a total gem. So it's fine.
Yeah.
It evens out.
And you know, going back to the democracy thing, this was like my takeaway from Biden's speech. And you know, there were actually the talking points that Biden hit in his speech were leaked beforehand. So we had access to all those, and I actually tweeted it out. And I noted that, he was saying that, he didn't want to send US troops to fight in a civil war that Afghans were not willing to fight in themselves. But I think the key thing here is that if Afghans don't want to fight this war, then it's not a civil war. It's a war that's been imposed on them by military occupation. So I think that's
Mhm.
really critical. And then, the main point that he kept really hitting was that like this was a failure of the Afghan government. Basically he didn't use these words, but like basically the crux of his argument was that the Afghan government and the supporters of the Afghan government didn't love democracy enough. They weren't willing to
Yeah.
fight for the democracy that was imposed on them by the United States. And so really this is their fault that, everything's gone to shit. And the United States has no responsibility. And, the other thing I think that was kind of a highlight of that speech that he gave yesterday was that his hands were tied. Trump tied his hands.
Mhm.
There was a deal in place with the Taliban. Trump had already started to withdraw. But even still, it's like, I mean, look, the situation in Afghanistan is like filled with contradiction. It's hard to say one thing is good or bad, right? Like I think a lot of people have been saying this is smart people. This is not a defeat for imperialists. It's a reorientation where chaos is the preferred strategy. And like, if you, if you look at like what the Taliban's going to be doing, that's like in the interests of the United States. They're going to be dealing with oil. They're going to be dealing with rare earth minerals. And like, look, it's right next to China. Afghanistan is. So,
Mhm.
it's I would not be surprised. It could things in my view could go one of two ways, right? Either the Taliban decides that they're gonna let Chinese companies help them extract their natural resources, in which case they're going to become a pariah again. Or it could let US and multinational corporations extract those resources, in which case we're going to see like a serious rehabilitation of the Taliban in the media. Somebody joked the other day about the Taliban putting their pronouns in their bio soon, because I think we've already seen this. We've seen the Taliban on kind of a charm offensive where they're going to Shia gatherings, they're doing interviews with women, and it's like almost like they've been like trained by Western agents in PR operations and how to make their organization more tenable to a Western audience. And so, I don't want to judge it preemptively, right? It could be the case that they're sincere about the overtures towards liberalism that they're making. It could be that they're not, right? I don't know. I'm not an Afghanistan expert, but it's definitely interesting to see. And there's so much going behind the scenes. And circling back to Zalmay Khalilzad, I think he has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, I think also though, like it's very common for like even extremist groups to sort of evolve with the culture. Like I kind of remember when ISIS first came on the scene and like one of my teachers was joking that like, this isn't like they're not like your grandfather's Salafi group, like they're this is completely like
I
they're
actually
marketing
tweeted, "This
now.
ain't your parents' Taliban," you know?
Yeah, sorry, or your parents, yeah.
Yeah.
But, like, I remember distinctly, like, ISIS, they were trying to have, like, a Twitter presence. There was, like,
Oh, they had one, yeah.
there was, like, a cat, like, ISIS cat account, and it was like, "I
Yeah.
as Islamic State, please." Like, they kind of evolve with the times, so I can kinda
Yeah, I
see that happening, but, I mean, at the same time, how many times are, like, gestures at progressivism, like, truly in good faith anyway? Like,
Right. I
really
mean,
rare.
even in our own societies, they're not. But I totally remember that that like PR operation that ISIS did, and then all the media was freaking out about how ISIS was luring Western women into their grips via kittens and Nutella.
Yeah.
It was kittens and Nutella were the two things that the media was really taking issue with. It was the most absurd shit. But yeah, and then it's like the same with this charm offensive that Giuliani from the Al Qaeda leader from
Yeah.
Idlib has been on, where he's being interviewed with Western media outlets, and he's like selling them on a book of lies about how they're really liberals and how they've changed over time. So um, of course we have to be incredibly skeptical of everything the Taliban is saying, which is not to say that the United States should have any role at all in determining the future of Afghanistan. We tried that, we failed, and the people rejected it. So I mean, just to give a personal anecdote, I had a friend I went to high school with who first of all, he was told he would never go to Afghanistan, which this is a story I've heard a lot. I have a family member who was told he would never go to Iraq. I've heard anti-war groups. I forget the woman's name, but there's this big anti-war movement leader, Cindy Milstein, and her son was told that he would never go to Iraq. So the U.S. military has been lying about this for a long time, and I'm sure if I would really like to see like a study on how many people were lied to about actually going to fight these wars, and then were forced to. But my friend from high school, he's in Kabul, and he saw a U.S. military tank strike a 4-year-old girl, send her flying through the air, and killed her. And like this, I know there's not like a lot of space on the left for discussions about the toll that this has taken on U.S. troops, and I just want to be super clear that nobody has suffered more than Afghans, but you
Mhm.
have like a class of U.S. U.S. military veterans who are now in think tanks, who have close ties to the generals, and they get all the attention in the mainstream media. And I tweeted the other day, like, I'd like to see the thoughts of working class veterans on these
Mhm.
issues, and not like the rad libs with podcasts, right? Not the veteran lab. I think we've had enough of them. Um, if you've been on Twitter, there's been, oh god, it's awful. But there's so much deception with this conflict, and um, it's not gonna stop, right? Like the U.S. still has like extreme interests in Afghanistan, it bordering Iran, it bordering China, um, and we're going to keep seeing propaganda, and it's going to go, like I said, if the Taliban sides with U.S. multinationals, then it's going to be favorable. If it sides with China, it's not. So I think that's really going to be the determining factor. But the other thing I think is really important right now is like this push to accept refugees from Afghanistan, like any and all refugees. And like, look, I'm of the opinion that like the United States created a fucking mess, and if
Mhm.
people's lives are in danger, then those individuals should be accepted as refugees. We need to like clean up our mess, right? But if people's lives aren't in danger, I see a comment on Rockfin from Brandon C saying that go on Snapchat and search out Kabul on there. There's nothing going on. Life is normal. I mean, the Taliban's not executing people in the streets as the media class told us they would be. They're not doing targeted revenge killings, you know. So why would we take all the educated liberals from Afghan society, bring them over here, and rather than like let them stay there and work towards like improving their society? I think that this like instinct, like, you know, I said on Twitter, just get a freaking doormat that says welcome like a normal person. You don't need to like publicly announce how welcoming you are. No one's judging you anyways, you know. But if you really cared about Afghan society, then you'd want them to have their best and brightest. You wouldn't want to, you know, brain drain them into the imperial core.
Yeah, I think that's like always a tough one because it's hard to like determine whether or not, someone is like able to stay or not, especially from like afar. So I can kind of see that. Something like I've kind of noticed, and I think our upcoming guest Max mentioned this in his book too, where like, you have these wars, they create a sort of refugee crisis, and then that crisis actually creates like a far right like racist backlash against say Muslims in this case, right? And so then what ends up happening is like both liberals and conservatives kind of have their talking points like given to them on a platter, because you get conservatives who are allowed to like raise hysteria about the horde of immigrants coming, and then you have liberals who get to virtue signal about how welcoming and accepting they are, and like, just like make their whole politics just being like, we welcome immigrants, we welcome refugees. And this all stems from like the same chaos, the bipartisan chaos that was, imposed on these
Right.
countries to begin with. And so, I mean, like, I am pretty like, I mean, because like a lot of people in my family are immigrants, like I'm pretty like liberal on immigration, but I definitely am kind of like it's always really suspicious to see like like the Democratic Party try to become this like party of immigrants when they're the ones who are starting, like they're partaking in creating these crises to begin with. So I would be
Right.
more interested in them saying, how about we stop creating refugee crises to begin with, instead of
Right.
just back and being like, oh yeah, of course you're welcome here after we've, destroyed your homes. And most people don't want to leave if they don't have to.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I just think it's like super important to point out that like all this destabilization is done in the name of democracy promotion, right? Like in
Mhm.
Afghanistan, it was like, oh God, these Taliban are not democratic. Huge refugee crisis. In Syria, we have to support the democratic revolutionaries, and um, aka Al Qaeda. Huge refugee crisis. If you go back, and Obama partook in the destruction of Afghanistan. The
Mhm.
destruction of Syria was started under his direction. And then there's also Honduras, where Obama and Biden overthrew or helped overthrow the Honduran government, um, in because they were accusing the president Manuel Zelaya of being undemocratic, right? And so we have this like massive refugee crisis that's ongoing. Honduras is basically a narco state. Um,
Mhm.
it is a narco state, and all this is done in the name of democracy promotion. And if like U.S. exported democracy is so great, then why do we keep having these people running for their lives? You know, and this is like not a safe trip from Honduras to the United States. There's all kinds of terrain that you have to navigate through that's like not hospitable for human life. And people choose that fate over the fate of staying in their own country. When I was in Honduras, I hired a translator because my Spanish is very poor, and 6 months prior, she had been kidnapped by a gang. I talked in the last episode about the president himself being involved in drug related corruption. And so again, democracy is all fine and good, but it doesn't work when you impose it at the barrel of a gun. So I just really thought that it's not just the Middle East; it's Afghanistan, which is not technically part of the Middle East. It's Latin America. you know, they say Colombia is democratic. Meanwhile, indigenous leaders and activists are getting massacred every week. And who's the real bad guy here? It's Venezuela. You know, it's the Syrian government, where they actually have like more social programs than their neighbors. You know, one point I like to raise is like a few years ago there was an MIT study that showed how it was like basically a graph, and it showed how popular interest in a policy has no correlation to that policy being implemented. What does correlate to that is the interest of special interest groups and lobbying groups. And so, you know, people say, oh, well, China is not democratic. They have a one-party system. But like their government follows popular demand, right? It's responsive to popular interests. What people want, they tend to get. At least in like on a large scale. We don't have that in the United States. So, you know, I think there's actually an argument that like China is more democratic than the United States. Sure, we have like these elections, but what do we get from them? We don't have health care, you know? So, you know, it's so funny that we're still doing this. Like, I remember, you know, I remember the movie Johnny Got His Gun. And
good book.
There's like a kid asking his father, he's like, you know, what is democracy? And the father says it's got something to do with young men killing each other. And this is like a movie based off Cold War politics, and we're still freaking doing it because we're in the new Cold War.
Yeah. You know, it kind of like you have to think about like what is the word democracy doing in these conversations, because a lot of people don't actually have the same definition of democracy. Like even in like democratic theory, like in the scholarship, people don't have the same definition. And so it's very hard. Like it's my personal view that in our current economic system, it's not really feasible to even have. And so obviously you're not going to be able to just impose it by imposing like these neoliberal shock therapy efforts that, you know, the US does in these imperial missions. But I kind of think that the role it's playing in this conversation is kind of similar to, you know, the language that was used during the mandate system, where it was like, oh, we need to make sure they have good governance. And then before that, you know, we need to make sure that the native population is enlightened, just like us. And so now we're seeing that with democracy, and I think also like women's rights and LGBT rights to an extent as well, where it's like, you know, these people don't have this like, you know, common argument brought up in Palestine conversations. It's like, well, you know, in Palestine, they don't have a pride parade, as though that's like one of the points against them, right? And it's kind of similar in the respect, you know, we're following this idea of like, we need to bring enlightenment. And I think that's the role that like democracy is playing. It's not real democracy. I don't think a lot of the people are even kidding themselves into thinking it is, but I don't know, maybe some are true believers.
Yeah, and you know, as it relates to the Afghan government, I mean, like there has been so much corruption in Afghanistan. You know, I was looking at an article the other day that said that $15 billion lost to waste, fraud, and abuse because of I mean, in regards to like reconstruction projects, right? And that those numbers came from SIGAR, the Special Investigator for Afghan Reconstruction. It's a U.S. government agency, U.S. military agency. And even they admitted that like there's massive fraud involved. And this is the same kind of like argument that's used when the United States wants to overthrow other governments. Like in Ukraine, they said that Ukraine's massively corrupt. Joe Biden was the champion of that. Of course, his son got millions of dollars for basically a no-show job. So actually, I'm going to leave it at that because we have Max Blumenthal joining us. I'm going to add him now. Max is the senior editor of The Gray Zone. He's also a senior non-resident fellow at the Blumenthal Institute, at large, of course. This is a joke that he actually annoyed me with for about 10 minutes one time when I was trying to interview him. But Max, welcome to the show.
I don't remember. Good to be on. Congratulations.
Thank you.
on Mazel Tov. I was late because I was looking for a video of Hunter Biden not in lurid sexual situations, and I couldn't find any.
Nice.
Like, there's literally no video of him not in sexual situation. Like, there's no video of him like at a conference, or he was on the board of all these he's on the board of Amtrak, he was on the board of Burisma, but you can't find video of him in his suit doing anything business-like.
Yeah, I have to say, when that laptop like first hit the press, I spent several nights not sleeping trying to erase the images from my mind.
Yeah. I got one off that guy. What was it? The backer of Steve Bannon, who has the fake fascist Chinese Republican exile. What's his name?
Gao something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was uploading a lot of those videos, and they're deeply disturbing material. I mean,
actually, at the same time, one of his websites was saying that the laptop contained video of him having sex with children, which like wasn't true, but you put out all this bombshell information at the same time as you put out those lies, and people just kind of accept it, which was crazy to me. I mean, like, I'm surprised that we haven't seen lawsuits about that.
Why can't you guys just be normal like us and have your political elites do blackface instead?
Who's us?
Canadians.
Well, Dov Hyken, do you know who he is?
Yeah.
He did blackface.
Oh, okay. So you do have that. Yeah.
Well, so who's Dov Hyken for our viewers?
Well, Dov Hyken is an assembly member in New York who says he's a Democrat, but he is a right-wing extremist who is a longtime member of the Jewish Defense League. And his partner in crime, literal crime, Victor Van Seer, aka Chaim Ben Pesach, carried out dozens of firebomb attacks on Soviet diplomats during a time when the Jewish American establishment was trying to, quote unquote, liberate Soviet Jewry. So they were like the thug squad for the Jewish American Zionist establishment to antagonize the Soviet Union until they agreed to send their Jewish population to Israel so they could win the demographic trench war with the Palestinians, like give us some Jewish bodies. So Dov Hyken is now, he runs like the Borough Park area down Ocean Ave, and he's a huge racist and anti-Palestinian fascist who plays a big role in New York politics. Like, when he comes knocking, de Blasio has to listen. And he dressed up as a black basketball player for there's Jimmy Kimmel too. Did you ever see Jimmy Kimmel's Karl Malone impersonation?
No, I didn't. That's wow. Okay. So I guess we can't outdo the US. I'll have to use my Lebanese side to outdo the US in scandals. So
you got that.
I think we've got that one.
It's important to point out that this was a pro-democracy thug squad. So
yeah, of course. Yeah.
But Max, you've been doing obviously you always do great work. I mean, you're an inspiration to a whole generation of anti-imperialist journalists. But your recent work on Cuba, I want to talk about that really quick before we talk a little bit about Afghanistan. Can you tell us about these pro-democracy hip-hop artists?
Yeah, they're just for democracy. They want to bring surprise medical bills to Cuba so that Cubans will be hunted down by collections agencies. That's what basically they're doing in hip-hop form. And I don't know if you want to freestyle, like drop some bars on surprise billing, but they actually don't know what they're caught up in. It's a very sad situation. And what I wrote about was how they and a collective of artists, and basically spanning the socio-economic and racial spectrum of Cuba, are coming together for regime change by creating a series of confrontations with the state through performance art and music, and being not so quietly backed by the US government through the typical regime change entities you talk about on this show, the National Endowment for Democracy, especially USAID, but also just overtly through the US Embassy. And they're called the San Ysidro Movement. And they've been trying to make inroads in the progressive left in the US, and specifically within the Black progressive intelligentsia. I was told that the leader of the BLM chapter in Montreal actually issued a letter or a statement supporting this group. We saw a letter in the New York Review of Books with a number of Black liberals and some progressive leftists who are prominent artists and intellectuals, including the Haitian Edwidge Danticat, supporting the leader or the coordinator of the San Ysidro movement, it's been a while, Jose Luis Miguel Alcantara. And they don't know who the hell this guy is, honestly. They really haven't looked into him. They don't know what they're about. And they're kind of useful idiots for a regime change op. But the point is, Fidel Castro, when he first came to New York, he wasn't allowed to stay in a downtown hotel or a hotel near the UN General Assembly. So where did he go? He went to Harlem, and Harlem embraced him. And that was, the Black left of America realized, here is someone who's fighting for dignity against the Yankees like we have. Here's a true leader. And Afro-Cubans have been oppressed, and he's giving them schools and roads. Then Fidel goes and fights apartheid South Africa. Even Henry Kissinger called him the only true revolutionary leader left in the world. He fights them in Angola. Many Afro-Cubans go and fight in that battle against apartheid troops. And Mandela credits Fidel Castro with helping to bring down the apartheid regime. And Fidel Castro gives sanctuary to Assata Shakur, as well as other Black leftist dissidents from the US. And so they're clearly trying to break Black American solidarity for the Cuban Revolution with this group, which is mostly Afro-Cuban, although they do have some lighter skinned, like literary type members, or they have a journalist guy who runs in Mexico, a National Endowment for Democracy and Soros sponsored magazine called Estornudo. But Alcantara is Afro-Cuban. He lives in the San Ysidro district of Old Havana. And if you ever go to Havana, this is a district where it's mostly Afro-Cuban. There's a lot of tourists around because of the romance of Old Havana. I don't know if you remember, what was the Ry Cooder film, the Buena Vista Social Club. He kind of brought back all of the old romantic singers from Cuba's past, and a lot of tourists started flocking down there. And basically, the whole social pyramid of Cuba got turned upside down in the special period. The Soviet Union and the socialist bloc collapsed, and all these tourists are down there. It's a big part of Cuba's special economy because it's a way to get cash in. And the Afro-Cuban population decides that this is something we can profit off of by essentially allowing ourselves to be exploited by tourists, or renting out our homes to the tourists. Meanwhile, you have the engineers and the highly trained people who go through the patriotic institutions of the revolution, who are educated at the best universities, and they're earning $7 a month in US dollars, whereas all these other people are hustling tourists. They're known like jineteras or jinetero. Jinetero means jockey, and it's women who are basically, a lot of them became pay-as-you-go girlfriends for tourists. And you would just see the most disgusting European men in these areas of Old Havana with beautiful young women who are making, hundreds of dollars a month. And then the men are jineteros. They'll come up to you and be like, hey, my friend, I'll show you around and give you a tour, or I'll buy you some, if you buy me, let me buy you a beer. And then they would skim 10 cents off the top, anything they can get, while this economy is just under siege with no support, no outside support. So that creates friction with the state. They get removed from the institutions of the revolution and the political education process, and they develop a separate culture and do fall under policing because of their contact with foreigners. Foreigners can bring in also political infiltration. I was stopped and briefly detained walking through that area of Old Havana with a Afro-Cuban guy. I mean, he started out trying to like hustle me or whatever, which is totally understandable in his position. And then he took me to all these homes where I saw got to meet families who practice Santeria, and I got to talk to them. And like, we got detained at the end of the night because here's this white guy from America hanging out there. What is his agenda? What is he doing? Could he be, recruiting people or something? They ran his file. It came through un borracho y nada más. Like, he's just a drunk. He's just some guy who likes to hang out. I mean, their security is excellent. And then they checked my ID and were like, they let us go after 2 seconds. But that's the situation there. And so the U.S. has moved into, I was there in 2000 when hip hop was starting to come in, and this group called Orishas was huge. They were internationally famous. Afro-Cuban group. They relocated to Spain. Their main rapper, Yotuel, had become kind of an international celebrity. And so Cuba was proud of them at the time. But you would see it, and I started to get a sense that some of this music was turning rebellious, was very critical, not necessarily of Fidel, but of the bureaucracy. Something you would hear in Egypt during the Mubarak era, for example, where people are just so sick of this massive bureaucracy that they have to get through. And they see the bureaucrats who are like eating well and are overweight while they're not doing so well, and they have to live far out of the city. And it turned into a much more coherently anti-government scene by the late 2000s. And there was one group, Los Aldeanos, who was really leading the pack, and their sound was pretty sophisticated. They're based in Cuba. And so USAID comes in and decides, like, we want to get this thing going. Like, what can we do? Cuba was starting to open up more and more. They were hosting famous rock and español singers, like Juanes came down for a big concert, a big rock festival in Cuba. And this promoter comes down from Serbia to try to get Los Aldeanos on the bill to raise their profile, because they're going at the government really hard. And this Serbian promoter had established a relationship with Los Aldeanos without them knowing that he was actually essentially a CIA agent who was part of the Otpor movement, which overthrew Milosevic through the Gene Sharp, color revolution tactics, basically pioneered them, and then went and formed this group called Canvas with the help of the CIA and Stratfor and the private CIA to train pro-democracy arsonists across the world, from Zimbabwe to Venezuela to Nicaragua, everywhere, with the methods of Gene Sharp, and Egypt as well. I mean, the April 6th movement was part of this. So anyway, this guy brings his tactics to Cuba, pretending to be a music promoter. The Cuban state starts to notice something strange is happening, because they're starting to involve a lot of celebrities, including one of the most famous revolutionary singers, Silvio Rodriguez. I'm a big fan of his. His son was kind of like, didn't know what was going on, and was brought in, and they were trying to bring him into a more critical point of view. They were doing just a really sloppy job. So Cuban intelligence rolls this operation up, and it gets exposed in like The Guardian and international media. And the U.S. Senate, it gets to the U.S. Senate, and Pat Leahy freaks out. He's like, what the hell are you doing down there? This is ridiculous what you're doing. Like, stop this right now. But they didn't stop. They escalated. USAID, it's like there's no oversight there. I mean, what they did in 2014 was they sent right-wing Venezuelans and I think Colombians into Cuba to lead fake HIV prevention workshops in order to continue to prey on the vulnerable Afro-Cuban youth population. And that the whole goal of these workshops, according to leaked documents that made it into the British press, was to recruit pro-democracy protesters. They're going at the most vulnerable, most restive population, the Afro-Cubans, and it's almost exactly what the U.S. Senate and the Intelligence Committee freaked out about during the Russiagate era, when they said, oh, Russia is trying to get BLM and getting behind BLM, but it was actually happening there. So
And
really,
I've heard they do the
yeah.
same thing with indigenous Hondurans, black Hondurans. It's like
Big time.
Yasha's weaponized immigrant. It's weaponized indigeneity.
Black Nicaraguans as well.
Right.
They're really trying to work on them on the Mosquito Coast, on the Atlantic coast.
Yeah.
And they're divided there. Look at the Uyghurs, the Tibetans.
Right.
That's the model. It's always to take some minority group that's pissed off and to amplify their grievances and then weaponize them. And in Cuba, this is, the key, they think, to regime change. So basically, the internet's taking off. It's starting to happen in Cuba. Cuba gets 3G in 2018, and that means you can access the internet through your cell phone, which means that Cubans are going to use social media, which is an enormously powerful form of communication, including for U.S. intelligence. That's what the Arab Spring, that's what enabled the Arab Spring. So Miguel Diaz-Canel comes in. He's getting a little bit concerned about the way the CIA is trying to use culture and art as a weapon against his government. And there's just so many things are taking place at this time. You have a really toxic regime change brew where the Castros have faded from the scene. Fidel has died. Raul is going to resign. Diaz-Canel, he was like a leader of a teachers union. He was not like known as a revolutionary fighter, so he doesn't have the mystique that they had. The Trump administration is introducing a maximum pressure policy, 240 new unilateral coercive measures, including cutting off remittances, which was a big, that's billions of dollars of cash just cut off. So, and that hurts and the Afro-Cuban population a lot. But it just hurts the people who are the most desperate and least connected to the state. And then, the pandemic hits and the tourists stop coming. So in 2018, Diaz-Canel passes a decree that declares that all art and culture has to be pre-approved by the Ministry of Culture because he sees what's going on. It was never enforced, but that provided the space for this San Ysidro movement to form. And then they launched their provocative protests. Alcantara, their coordinator, he basically gets children in the San Ysidro district to run around with U.S. flags, like that's his performance. And then they're detained by cops because the cops they're surrounded. It's like that's a frightening display there. Then he takes pictures of himself on the toilet with a Cuban towel around his waist, like a Cuban flag towel, like a direct insult to the Cuban Revolution. There's another picture he took of himself lying on the beach, and he's sitting on top of a Cuban flag with U.S. swimsuit, U.S. flag swimsuit, and he writes "Cuba Libre" on the sand. Like, this guy's supposed to be a performance artist, and another one of his performances was he got children from the neighborhood who are suffering enormously under the siege under Trump. And then he has them look at an exhibition of candy wrappers that he drew or painted. And his paintings suck. It's absolute garbage. And the point is to show them what they're being denied by the communists. Then you have like rappers like Michael Osorbo from he's one of the more popular anti-government rappers now. He said that he loves Trump and that Trump should surround Cuba with the U.S. Navy and not allow anything inside. He was like, ship, just completely put us under siege. Don't let anything inside until this government falls. That's the kind of rhetoric they're using in the middle of Havana. Then you've got this other guy, Dennis Solis, who is an aspiring rapper. And he was constantly involved in all of this kind of regime change activity. So he gets a visit from a police officer, and the cop comes and he starts live streaming on Facebook, and he's like, "Fuck you, maricon," which is like a homophobic slur. And then he says, I'm for Trump. Trump is my president. Trump 2020. So he goes to jail for basically defying a police order. And that becomes a big site of protest. Free Dennis Solis. That leads to protests outside the Ministry of Culture. All of this flows directly into the protests that we've seen now, along with a massive a massive information war through an echo chamber of anti-government Cuban websites that have cropped up based in Miami through shell corporations, as well as these very suspect Facebook pages. There's one where the protest began. It's called City of Humor. And this happened in Nicaragua too. When I was covering their coup in 2018, very similar situation, much more violent though, where basically in all these small towns, there'd be these Facebook groups that would develop, and they would provide people with local news and local gossip and cater to their interests and get as many members as they could. And then when it was time, when the shit hit the fan and it was like time for everything to jump off, it would like change into regime change, go out into the street. And that's what the City of Humor website did. Reuters profiled it and of course buried the lead, which is that people who ran the website were based in Miami. So that's what happened. And it all has led to an intensification of sanctions, and basically Obama's vice president, the vice president of the president who was seeking to normalize relations somewhat with Cuba from renormalizing. And he has embraced Trump's maximum pressure policy and intensified it. Samantha Power, her USAID, recently put out a call for funding applications in support of Cuban regime change. And it cited their greatest success as this song, Patria Evita, which has about 8 million, maybe 10 million views on YouTube. It features Yotuel, Michael Osorbo, Luis Miguel Otero Alcantara, the San Ysidro movement. And it's like a rap song that's just like regime change rap. And like the hook is like, it's over, like 62 years, it's over. I mean, and it became the mantra, like the slogan of all of those right-wing Cuban American Gusano protests we saw in Washington and Miami. Everyone wearing Patria Evita. What does that mean? I mean, that's significant. What does Patria Evita mean? It means homeland and life, but the national slogan of Cuba, which is really at the heart of the spirit of the Cuban Revolution and of anti-imperialism in Cuba, is Patria o Muerte, homeland or death. There was a CIA attack on a Cuban merchant, on a merchant ship that was bringing weapons to Cuba legally to support the revolution, and many dock workers were killed in this explosion. It was a very emotional moment. The CIA, it was right after the Bay of Pigs, and so Fidel delivers an emotional speech and declares at its apex, Patria o Muerte. What does he mean? He doesn't mean if you don't support us, you will die. He says, we will die if we don't defend our country. If we don't have a country, we will go back to the death and morbidity we experienced under Batista. So what they've done with this slogan is, first of all, represent the national slogan of Cuba as authoritarian threat, like you will die if you don't support the homeland, but also to erode and evaporate Cuba's anti-imperialist spirit so that it can no longer resist the ethos of Miami, which is all about, making a profit, being, good weaponized immigrants for the U.S. empire, and maybe becoming famous. So it's like life and homeland, and you see these memes going around on Gusano web pages, like Facebook pages, and it will show like Patria o Muerte, and it shows like Cubans waiting in a line, in Havana, and they're looking sweaty and they're in like ragtag clothes. They're waiting for like some handouts or something from the government. And then, I mean, people wait in line in the US all the time, but anyway, then Patria Evita, and it'll just show a stocked Costco with tons of food in the aisles. And it's like the Miami dream. So that's what this is. And just one more kind of factoid that I think is really interesting. I mean, you both know Gloria Estefan, right? I know that you're like millennials or Zoomers or whatever, so you might know.
I don't know who that
you
is.
don't?
That's
Come and shake your body when you do that samba. I know you can control yourself any longer.
I know the song, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know the song.
Yeah,
I am.
Yeah.
Probably
Can you do some more though? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, the rhythm is gonna get you. You know that. It's her and the Miami Sound Machine, like just kind of cheeseball Miami. sort of samba with like synth drums, like and her husband is the producer, Emilio Estefan. Her father is named, I think, Jorge Solero, and he was a bodyguard for Batista. And he was recruited by the CIA to storm the Cuban shores during the Bay of Pigs, was captured actually by his own cousin, and then released to the US. He heads off to Vietnam as a volunteer in order to demonstrate in his mind that the Cuban and American population will do anything for American empire, so that they will try again someday to invade Cuba. And he was sort of an ambassador of the community in Miami, Calle Ocho. So he gets sprayed with Agent Orange, deteriorates as a man in front of Gloria Estefan's eyes. U.S. empire actually killed him. It killed him. And she, instead of saying, how could they abuse my father this way for a disgusting war where we just were mowing down poor rice farmers by the hundreds of thousands, instead of that, she takes on his politics along with her husband, Emilio. And they helped put together this song, from what I'm hearing in Cuban circles, Patria Evita. And now they have a new song coming out called Libertad. Because if you see like the Gusano protesters, they always go like that for Libertad. That's like their new symbol. And so this song is going to be their anthem. He's making it with the like Free Cuba Foundation, which is funded by the U.S. government. So it's basically another spook anthem. And you have a direct line from Batista through the Miami Sound Machine to these kind of regime change anthems. It's pretty interesting, and it's very out in the open.
Yeah. I just do have to issue a small correction. You mentioned a Cuban musical group earlier. They've actually been renamed to the Buena Vista Social Distancing Club. So,
okay. Well, I'm glad they're masking up, and
that's all that matters, really.
But this is really interesting because it sounds like they're kind of following the playbook that was written by Pussy Riot, right? Because you had Pussy Riot engaging in all these high-profile stunts, getting, running at Putin naked and shit like that, meeting with Hillary Clinton, getting praise from Hillary Clinton. And this sounds like pretty much the same thing. But, if you actually listen to Pussy Riot's music, I wouldn't recommend it. I like punk music, but this is just like absolutely jarring.
Oh,
awful.
It's horrible music. It's so bad. I mean, no one knows that they even make music.
They have like 12 songs.
Yeah, they're not. I don't know what they are. They're obviously an op. But that's a great point about Pussy Riot. Like, if I had thought of that, I would have said this is kind of like the Cuban version of Pussy Riot, because it really, and it's an effective way of creating friction with a state, and then exposing it or presenting it to the West as authoritarian. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you think would happen in the U.S. if a bunch of naked Antifa protesters ran into Catholic church or evangelical mega church and just started like having sex or like grinding on a representation of Jesus? Like, the cops would have arrested them, wouldn't they? I mean, that's just what would happen in any society. It's not like, oh, well, excuse me, we need to stop. This is art and we value art as a society. So they got arrested. I mean, but they're always doing that. And I don't know if you remember this piece I wrote about Reuters and the BBC basically functioning as an arm of the British Foreign Office through these leaked or hacked documents that I got, and Twitter put a warning label on my piece. Well, it buried in the piece is that a Russian opposition outlet called Media Zona was involved in these UK Foreign Office programs. The UK Foreign Office was providing them with training and social media support, and it's run by two members of Pussy Riot. So, I mean, you have a pretty direct connection there.
Yeah. You got a few minutes to talk about Afghanistan?
Yeah, I got like 15 minutes I can do.
Great. All right. So, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about Afghanistan while we were waiting for you, but like, I don't know. I guess you're a great guest. What's your general take on like what's going on? If you had to just shout something out.
Well, I just have questions about what's going on right now. I'm not someone who's going to pretend to have serious expertise. We're going to talk to Pepe Escobar tomorrow at Moderate Rebels at 2 p.m. And I think he was captured by the Taliban briefly. He's going to have a lot more to say about where the opium money will go, what the significance of the $1 trillion of rare earth minerals is under Taliban control, what it means that the Taliban its leadership has been in Doha for the past several years. Well, basically since they were put in exile, and they're essentially under Qatari management in a country that hosts the largest U.S. air base in the Middle East, which played a significant role in the Syrian dirty war. It's obvious that they have sort of professional leadership now that understands that they need to do certain things in order to be accepted, at least grudgingly, by parts of the international community. The way that Al-Qaeda's largest franchise since 9/11 is gaining acceptance in the Idlib province of northwest Syria. But what is their relationship with the US going to be? Are they going to actually be used perhaps as a proxy against Iran? I mean, is that possible? Why did the US leave all of these weapons for them? Was that just a way of transferring weapons to the new authority? And what about these pipelines? Are they going to provide protection for pipelines in the works that have ownership that is part of the ownership by U.S. companies? Is that going to be like the Unocal pipeline in the 90s that the Taliban were essentially paid to guard because the forces of CIA proxy Gulbuddin Hekmatyar were not as reliable? These are all the questions I have right now. And what we can clearly see is that the factions in Washington that have prevailed for the last 20 years have suffered a blow. And Biden does deserve some credit for that. I mean, he just decided we got to get the hell out of there. And that's not how war is waged anymore. War is waged either by proxy, through sanctions and financial instruments, unilateral coercive measures, drones, satellites. And why would the Biden administration fight this old, idiotic neocon way of war? So the media is pissed off. Like the Beltway media, you can really see what they are. They're just part of the war lobby. And no one is being held accountable for this titanic crime. Trillions of dollars wasted, hundreds of thousands of lives wasted. And, if you're a patriotic American or you're a veteran, those thousands of American lives wasted. No one is being held accountable. The same Beltway press corps that almost made me feel sympathetic for Jake Sullivan at the press conference he had yesterday. I mean, one of the least sympathetic people who's ever been born in the history of humanity, I almost felt sympathy for. That same press corps rehabilitated the image of George W. Bush because he said some semi-coherent statements against Donald Trump. And it's George W. Bush that we should be talking about right now. We should be doxing him and then taking him and putting him in a windowless cell after he's prosecuted for these titanic crimes. I mean, that's what the American public and the media should be doing. He's responsible. Dick Cheney's still out there. He's responsible. And it was the Democrats, Scott Crow or something, Scott Crow. He teamed up with Dick Cheney's daughter to sabotage Trump's attempt to withdraw from Afghanistan. That's the Democrats. So there's no accountability. And I mean, once you start holding these people accountable, you're going after big part of the U.S. economy. I mean, a lot of mansions went up in suburban D.C. because of that war. A lot of luxury apartments have gone up in traditionally Black neighborhoods in D.C. because of that war. And we're talking about a war that is still coming home. I mean, it came home through the 9/11 attacks. It hasn't finished coming home here.
Yeah. I was telling Mila earlier, I really think that
I was always wondering, is it Mila or Mila? So now I know.
Yeah, I know. It's not even I'm not even remotely Slavic. I just have the name because it's just, it's short for a name that's very embarrassing. So,
Which
All
is
right. So once we get like 100 subscribers, Mila's gonna reveal that name. No, I'm kidding.
it's only embarrassing because it shares it with a very cringe celebrity. So I
is
think
it?
you can guess it because
It's
it's.
me, Mila Yiannopoulos.
Oh yeah, okay, you got me. I'm actually a gay man. No, it's like an offshoot of Jamila, but like the only celebrity with that name is very annoying. So it's not great. We need a better reputation, I think.
And then there's Jamila Prayapal.
Oh, I didn't know there was another one.
No. Pramila
No, that's-
Jayapal. She's
Oh,
right.
okay. Yeah. But it's cool because like either way, like if it's my first name or last name, it's like it's one of the US's enemy countries. So maybe my next name will be like Chinese. Like I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. So speaking of China,
That's cultural appropriation.
I was saying to Mila earlier, I think the determining factor in how the U.S. media is going to wind up treating the Taliban is going to be who they work out economic deals with, right? If they let Chinese companies come in and help them extract their resources, then they'll be pariahs again. If they let U.S. and multinational corporations come in, they'll be considered liberal icons. I don't know how it's going to go. I think it's really too early to know for sure whether the Taliban's genuine about these kind of the kind of new inclusive society that they want to lead this time. Of course, Max has done some great work exposing U.S. support for the Mujahideen, again the precursor to the Taliban and Al Qaeda. When they were not exactly, willing to go on TV with female reporters or go to Shia gatherings and such. So I mean, like,
they weren't friendly to Clarissa Ward,
right? Yeah, I mean,
that.
at the time when they were, all that propaganda from the 90s, and they were, I mean, what was that book, Not Without My Daughter, right? It was like about Afghan society, and the women weren't allowed to leave their houses. And that was true, but it was still kind of regime change propaganda. But they were doing all these things and at the same time getting support from the United States. Max has an excellent anecdote that he's reported about the Adopt a Mouge program. If you could talk about.
I think I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, this was actually through my friend Helena Cobbin, who has been reporting for much longer than I have, almost as long as I've been alive. And so these veteran reporters, they have incredible stories about the Cold War, or at least the first Cold War. And she told me that she was invited to an academic conference. I think I'm getting this right, in Tucson or Phoenix, Arizona. It was like in Scottsdale. No, it was in Tucson. And it was about Central Asia and Afghanistan. And then she thought it was going to be a academic conference. She gets to this fancy hotel, goes into the auditorium, and there are speeches, and it's like a political rally where they're raising money for the freedom fighters of Afghanistan. And there's a hard-charging first-term congressman on stage named John McCain, who's delivering the keynote address. And in the audience, she said there were actual Mujahideen commanders, and they were sitting next to their mentor, not their mentor, like their benefactor, who were like Republican wealthy housewives from the area who had adopted a Muj, and they were like, it's time to adopt a Muj. Everyone donate to your Muj, and we're going to support a freedom fighter in the war against the Soviet Union. So that's kind of like an early scene in my book, The Management of Savagery, that just highlights perfectly the folly of the dirty war the CIA waged in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's
and similar
excellent.
events.
I strongly recommend it. Yeah.
Similar events took place in the U.S. around the Syrian dirty war. Actually,
don't even get me started.
Where members of the FSA would actually come to conferences in the U.S. and raise money in similar ways. So this isn't like the only time. But yeah, Alex,
they like Toys for Tots. They donate to Toys for Tots. They donate for Adopt a Moosh.
Yeah.
But it's funny, you mentioned John McCain being there. When I think about this conference that I went to in DC a few weeks ago, and some of the most fiery people to speak were people like Josh Hawley and Tom Cotton. It's almost like they're kind of like cultivated by the regime change lobby as young people, and become more and more effective over the years. And eventually we're going to see, when they die, we're going to see that kind of rehabilitation that we saw from John McCain, I think. But Max, I was cutting you off, so if you want to go ahead.
No, that's a good point. I mean, they sound a different tone than McCain. McCain really spoke for the U.S. establishment and was beloved by Democrats and got people like Jake Tapper to act as his de facto press secretary because he could be seen as such a man of the center. Even though he had a pretty right-wing record on a lot of issues like abortion, he was opposed to MLK Day initially in Arizona. But Hawley and Cotton, they have a pseudo-populist tone because capitalism is really cracking at the seams. And they need to speak to American workers who feel abandoned and divert their rage to a convenient foreign enemy, which is China. Like Russiagate was really just a freak out among the Beltway elite and the media. But American workers, they can be mobilized against China because like the steel industry, for example, suffered because of cheap Chinese steel. A lot of all the exports from China replaced the labor from the Rust Belt. It wasn't China's fault. It was the fault of the corporate chieftains who wanted to assemble their products with dirt cheap labor. When China was embarking on a long-term, well-planned strategy to actually develop its own industrial capacity. So that's what Cotton and Hawley are doing, and they're mobilizing resentment in ways that McCain didn't, and playing a very effective role in driving blue-collar support into the ranks of the Republican Party. And we're seeing that we're going to just keep seeing that trend throughout probably the rest of our lives. I mean, the Democrats they've completely given up on laborers, except for, the unions and that they have in like the nurses union, the teachers union that they have in their back pocket. But China is a big part of our culture war too. I mean, at January 6th at the Capitol, you all should have been there. It was just one of the most eye-popping.
I was in class, actually. I was in my law class and it was unfolding and everyone's like, what the hell is going down over there? Because like in Canadian law classrooms, they kind of like portray the US as like our chaotic sibling. So
well, it was it was perfect for reinforcing that image. Just like how I was at the Capitol and I was looking at images of Canada and nothing was going on and people were like not doing anything cool and they were like, boring.
Yeah, we don't have anyone storm the parliament in costumes. Where's the vigor over here? I don't know. Well, I'm in Quebec, which is like actually has a very heavy protest culture. Like if you raise tuition by like $100, it's like riot. So, I mean,
but that goes hand in hand with like the Gusanos and the Falun Gong.
Yeah, well, those ones I saw in Vancouver when I saw the protests. And it's funny because the ones that I saw like in the exact same location, I went back there like a week later and I saw like MEK people and FSA flags waving. And I told my mom, who's like, she's Christian from like a Middle East Christian, and I was like, stay away from the art gallery. There's FSA flags over there.
Yeah.
Like, not again. But yeah, no, I've definitely seen these going on in the last few weeks, which
Those are moderate Christian exterminators, by the way.
oh yeah, sorry, they're moderate. Yeah. They might actually let you convert before murdering you, I think. That's
Yeah.
I was on the Facts on the Ground podcast a few days ago, Max, and we were talking about, all these regime change cults, the Church of Scientology, Falun Gong, and the MEK. And I had totally forgotten about it, but, the MEK held a rally on the State Department's doorstep, and Max and I were the only reporters there. And Medea Benjamin of Code Pink was there, and the MEK cultists had her picture with Iranian officials printed out, and they were chasing her around the perimeter of the protest. You're a terrorist, you're a terrorist. And they had they had a minder for Max. One guy just following him around the whole time, preventing him from asking anyone any questions. I actually got one of the guys to tell me. I said, if you guys are saying you want to overthrow the government, what comes next? And he says, well, then maybe Mariam Ravaji could be president. And that's the leader of the MEK cult. But
great.
Max and I being the only two, I guess, like, alternative reporters there, left-wing reporters there. There were a couple other reporters there from like NBC who ran with headlines like pro-democracy protesters. This is like another example of them using that term, march on the White House. And again, it's a regime change call, like the conference that I was just reporting on. Huge support from high-level U.S. government officials. John Bolton was being paid to speak there. The protests that we were at, there were a number of U.S. officials. I think one of them was Ambassador. Who was that guy? He was the Richardson.
Yeah, Bill Richardson. Well, he was the
Bill
governor
Richardson
of New Mexico.
Yeah,
and was a big figure in the Clinton administration. But the MEK just had another rally in front of the U.S. Capitol that wasn't really covered. I happened upon it because I was just up there the other day, and they had all these gravestones and flags to mark their dead. They're members of the Mujahideen al-Khalq that were killed by the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Government. And I walked up to a bunch of their guys. They were just sitting there because they were getting ready for their big rally. I mean, it's elaborate. There's so much money behind it. It's Saudi and Israeli money. And I said, how many terror attacks have you carried out inside Iranian territory in the past few years? And so I got them all whipped up. It was like just for fun. I was on my way to the eviction moratorium where I then
and then you harassed Cori Bush allegedly.
Well, yeah, I didn't harass her at all.
I know, I'm just kidding.
I harassed Adam Schiff because he deserves to be harassed. But
yeah.
But anyway, the guy was screaming at me, and we were going back and forth, and I was like presenting him with evidence that the MEK has carried out assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists inside Iran, and he kept trying to shift the discussion and not answer the question. But when I finally got him to answer, I was like, so you support these sanctions that are preventing people from buying shirts and clothes and like having food? And he's like, yes, sanctions are good. Sanctions are good. And he got really into that. So the MEK is like hated in Iran.
Well, it's very sociopathic because they also supported like Iraq attacking its own people as well. But I grew up in Vancouver where there's like a lot of Iranian diaspora there, and like they're fairly like right-leaning, but even the like right-leaning ones I know are still very opposed to the sanctions. So this is like a very extremist view. It's not even like a view that's held by anti-regime people in my I'm not a journalist, but in my limited interactions with the community.
No, that's accurate. It's kind of the sense I get in Westwood as well. Uh, I have some connections with the community there, and they do have like a progressive underground.
Hmm.
I wouldn't call it a silent majority, but it's a significant minority. And they, reached out to me over the years. I did an event on Palestine with some of them, and they're sick of they hate the MEK, obviously, but they're just sick of the constant pressure to support something that's killing their family members over there.
Hmm.
And that's a powerful. It's also, there's a similar dynamic with Cubans. There was a segment of the Cuban American community, the younger segment, that supported Obama's quasi normalization policy. And even being around the Venezuelan embassy, where Alex was basically locked inside, surrounded by like a zombie mob of right-wing Venezuelans, you would get the sense among a lot of them, especially as their numbers started to grow, that it was all kind of like a product of pressure. And to be part of the community, they needed to assert themselves there, and that they had no idea what the hell they were doing there. And they were just, like brainwashed zombies being guided by a few sociopaths, Carlos Vecchio in particular. It's the tragedy of the weaponized immigrant, I think, is that they get brought into the hateful politics of the US, and they get severed from their roots.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had to just look this up right now because I forgot exactly what it was. But if you remember at the MEK protest at the State Department, the main chant that they were doing was U.S. must take action. Mullahs must get more sanctions. And then, the drum players would go, and actually that's another. That's
it was
another
sick.
example.
Like General Jack Keane, do you remember him?
Yeah, that's right.
From the Institute for the Study of War, which is really like the Institute for the Advancement of War. And he said, like, Iranians are starving, maximum pressure is working, they're hungry, unemployment is growing, and the crowd is like, yay, unemployment. And I kind of stalked him down the street while these MEK guards were pushing me away. And I'm like, why are you celebrating people starving? What the hell is wrong with you? And of course he couldn't answer that, but it's like, wait a minute, I'm a sick sociopath. I didn't realize that. They're paying me, so.
And that's another good example of people being there that, don't really know what they're getting into, because, if you remember, there were a lot of like church looking people, clearly not Iranian and clearly had nothing to do with Iranians who were there, playing instruments and that sort of thing, obviously paid to be there. So, these kinds of organizations, regime change cults, NGOs, highly funded, a lot of them are like normal liberals, that, maybe not with the cultists, but with the regime change NGOs, they're just like people that might be your neighbor or something, who are really involved in something much bigger. Max, I'm sure you probably have to go at this point. We really thank you.
As do I.
Coming. Yeah. Okay. So you know what? We'll conclude it here. Again, I appreciate you guys leaving comments, leaving tips. Make sure to share this. We're trying to do something a little bit different here. So help get the word out, and join us next week.
All right. Thanks a lot.